dedicated to the true and loyal members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association in the cause of African redemption. This volume is compiled from the speeches and articles delivered and written by Marcus Garvey from time to time. My purpose for compiling, same primarily, was not for publication, but rather to keep as a personal record of the opinions and sayings of my husband during his career as the leader of that portion of the human family known as the Negro race. However, on second thought, I decided to publish this volume in order to give to the public an opportunity of studying and forming an opinion of him, not from inflated and misleading newspaper and magazine articles, but from expressions of thoughts enunciated by him in defense of his oppressed and struggling race, so that by his own words he may be judged, and Negroes the world over may be informed and inspired, for truth brought to light forces conviction, and a state of conviction inspires action. The history of contact between the white and black races for the last 300 years or more records only a series of pillages, wholesale murders, atrocious brutalities, industrial exploitation, disfranchisement of the one over the other, the strong against the weak. But the sun of evolution is gradually rising, shedding its light between the clouds of misery and oppression, and quickening and animating to racial consciousness and eventual national independence of black men and women the world over. It is human, therefore, that few of us within the Negro race can comprehend this transcendent period. We all suffer in a more or less degree. We all feel this awakened spirit of true manhood and womanhood. But it's given to few the vision of leadership. It's an inspiration. It's a quality born in man. Therefore, in the course of leadership, it's natural that one should meet opposition because of ignorance, lack of knowledge, and sympathy of the opposition in understanding fully the spirit of leadership. With the dawn of this new era, which precedes the day of national independence for Negroes, it's well for all members of the race to understand their leadership, know what its essentials, its principles are, and help it to attain its goal and liberate a race in the truest sense of the word. In Chapter 1 of this volume, I have endeavored to place before my readers gems of expression convincing in their truths. Chapter 2 deals with definitions and expositions of various interesting themes. Chapters 3 and 4 contain a collection of brief essays on subjects affecting world conditions generally, and Negroes in particular. In Chapter 5, I have produced what I consider two of the best speeches of my husband. It is my sincere hope and desire that this small volume will help to disseminate among the members of my race everywhere the true knowledge of their past history, the struggles and strivings of the present leadership, and the glorious future of national independence in a free and redeemed Africa, achieved through organized purpose and organized action. Amy Jacques Garvey, New York City, February 23, 1923. Chapter 1. History is the landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life. The history of a movement, the history of a nation, the history of a race is the guidepost of that movement's destiny, that nation's destiny, that race's destiny. What you do today that is worthwhile inspires others to act at some future time. Chance has never yet satisfied the hope of a suffering people. Action, self-reliance, the vision of self and the future have been the only means by which the oppressed have seen and realized the light of their own freedom. Life is that existence that is given to man to live for a purpose, to live to his own satisfaction and pleasure, providing he forgets not the God who created him and who expects a spiritual obedience and observation of the moral laws that he has inspired. There is nothing in the world common to man that man cannot do. The ends you serve that are selfish will take you no further than yourself, but the ends you serve that are for all and common will take you even into eternity. It is only the belief and the confidence we have in a God why man is able to understand his own social institutions and move and live like a rational human being. Take away the highest ideal, faith and confidence in a God, and mankind at large is reduced to a savagery, and the race destroyed. A race without authority and power is a race without respect. Criticism is an opinion for good or ill, generally indulged in by the fellow who knows more than anyone else, yet the biggest fool. There is no criticism that calls not forth yet another. The last critic is the biggest fool of all, for the world starts and ends with him. He is the source of all knowledge, yet knows nothing, for there is not a word one finds to use that there is not another that hath the same meaning. Then wherefore do we criticize? Fear is a state of nervousness fit for children and not men. When men fears a creature like himself, he offends God, in whose image and likeness he is created. Man, being created equal, fears not man, but God. To fear is to lose control of one's nerves, one's will, to flutter like a dying fowl, losing consciousness, yet alive. Ambition is the desire to go forward and improve one's condition. It is a burning flame that lights up the life of the individual and makes him see himself in another state. To be ambitious is to be great in mind and soul, to want that which is worthwhile and strive for it, and to go on without looking back, reaching to that which gives satisfaction. To be humanly ambitious is to take in the world which is the province of man. To be divinely ambitious is to offend God by rivaling him in his infinite majesty. Admiration is a form of appreciation that is sometimes mistaken for something else. There may be something about you that suggests good fellowship when kept at a distance, but in closer contact would not be tolerated, otherwise it would be love. Religion is one's opinion and belief in some ethical truth. To be a Christian is to have the religion of Christ, and so to be a believer of Mohammed is to be a Mohammedan. But there are so many religions that every man seems to be a religion unto himself. No two persons think alike, even if they outwardly profess the same faith. So we have as many religions in Christianity as we have believers. Death is the end of all life, in the individual or the thing. If physical, the crumbling of the body into dust from whence it came. He who lives not uprightly dies completely in the crumbling of the physical body. But he who lives well transforms himself from that which is mortal to immortal. Faithfulness is actuated by a state of heart and mind in the individual that changes not. No one is wholly faithful to a cause or an object, except his heart and mind remain firm, without change or doubt. If one's attitude or conduct changes toward an object, then one has lost in one's faithfulness. It is a wholeness of belief overshadowing all suspicion, all doubt, admitting of no question. To serve without regret or disgust, to obligate oneself to that which is promised or expected, to keep to our word and do our duty well. There are but few faithful people nowadays. Prohibition is to abstain from intoxicating liquor, as it makes us morbid and sometimes drunk. But we get drunk every day nevertheless, not so much by the strength of what we sip from the cup, but that which we eat, the water we drink, and the air we inhale. which, at fermentation, conspire at eventide to make us so drunk and tired that we lose control of ourselves and fall asleep. Everybody is a drunkard, and if we were to enforce real prohibition, we would all be dead. There is no strength but that which is destructive, because man has lost his virtues, and only respects force, which he himself cannot counteract. This is the day of racial activity, when each and every group of this great human family must exercise its own initiative and influence in its own protection. Therefore, Negroes should be more determined today than they have ever been, because the mighty forces of the world are operating against non-organized groups of people who are not ambitious enough to protect their own interests. Wake up, Ethiopia! Wake up, Africa! Let us work towards the one and glorious end of a free, redeemed, and mighty nation. Let Africa be a bright star among the constellation of nations. A man's bread and butter is only ensured when he works for it. The world has now reached the stage when humanity is really at the parting of the ways. It is a question of man mind thyself. The political readjustment of the world means that those who are not sufficiently able, not sufficiently prepared, will be at the mercy of the organized classes for another 100 or 200 years. The only protection against injustice in man is power, physical, financial, and scientific. The masses make the nation and the race. If the masses are illiterate, that is the judgment passed on the race by those who are critical of its existence. The function of the press is public service without prejudice or partiality. To convey the truth as it is seen and understood without favoritism or bias. Education is the medium by which a people are prepared for the creation of their own particular civilization and the advancement and glory of their own race. Nationhood is the only means by which modern civilization can completely protect itself. Independence of nationality, independence of government, is the means of protecting not only the individual, but the group. Nationhood is the highest ideal of all peoples. The evolutionary scale that weighs nations and races balances alike for all people. Hence, we feel sure that someday the balance will register a change for the Negro. If we are to believe the divine injunction, we must realize that the time is coming when every man and every race must return to its own vine and fig tree. Let Africa be our guiding star, our star of destiny. So many of us find excuses to get out of the Negro race because we're led to believe that the race is unworthy and that it has not accomplished anything. Cowards that we are! It is we who are unworthy because we're not contributing to the uplift and upbuilding of this noble race. How dare anyone tell us that Africa cannot be redeemed when we have 400 million men and women with warm blood coursing through their veins? The power that holds Africa is not divine. The power that holds Africa is human, and it is recognized that whatsoever man has done, man can do. We of the Negro race are moving from one state of organization to another, and we shall so continue until we have thoroughly lifted ourselves into the organization of government. Be as proud of your race today as our fathers were in the days of yore. We have a beautiful history, and we shall create another in the future that will astonish the world. Woman. What the night is today, the woman is to man. The period of change that brings us light out of darkness, darkness out of light, and semi-light out of darkness are like the changes we find in woman day by day. She makes one happy, then miserable. You are kind to her, then unkind. Constant, yet inconstant. Thus we have woman. No real man can do without her. Love. A happy but miserable state in which man finds himself from time to time. Sometimes he believes he is happy by loving, then suddenly he finds how miserable he is. It is all joy. It sweetens life, but it doesn't last. It comes and goes, but when it's active, there is no greater virtue, because it makes one supremely happy. We cannot hold our love, but there is one love that never changes or is unmistaken, and that is God's. The longer we hold our love, the nearer we approach like unto our Creator. The whole world is run on bluff. No race, no nation, no man has any divine right to take advantage of others. Why allow the other fellow to bluff you? Every student of political science, every student of economics knows that the race can only be saved through a solid industrial foundation, and that the race can only be saved through political independence. Take away industry from a race, take away political freedom from a race, and you have a group of slaves. Peoples everywhere are traveling towards industrial opportunities and greater political freedom. As a race oppressed, it is for us to prepare ourselves that at any time the great change in industrial freedom and political liberty comes about, we may be able to enter into the new era as partakers of the joys to be inherited. Lagging behind in the van of civilization will not prove our higher abilities. Being subservient to the will and caprice of progressive races will not prove anything superior in us. Being satisfied to drink of the dregs from the cup of human progress will not demonstrate our fitness as a people to exist alongside of others. But when, of our own initiative, we strike out to build industries, governments, and ultimately empires, then, and only then, will we as a race prove to our Creator and to man in general that we are fit to survive and capable of shaping our own destiny. The world ought to know that it could not keep 400 million Negroes down forever. There is always a turning point in the destiny of every race, every nation, of all peoples, and we have come now to the turning point of the Negro, where we have changed from the old cringing weakling and transformed into full-grown men, demanding our portion as men. I am not one of those Christians who believe that the Bible can solve all the problems of humanity. The Bible is good in its place, but we are men. We are the creatures of God. We have sinned against Him. Therefore, it takes more than the Bible to keep us in our places. Man is becoming so vile that today we cannot afford to convert him with moral, ethical, physical truths alone, but with that which is more effective, implements of destruction. Leadership means everything: pain, blood, death. To be prosperous in whatever we do is the sign of true wealth. We may be wealthy in not only having money, but in spirit and health. It is the most helpful agency toward a self-satisfying life. One lives, in an age like this, nearer perfection by being wealthy than by being poor. To the contented soul, wealth is the stepping stone to perfection. To the miser, it is the nearest avenue to hell. I would prefer to be honestly wealthy than miserably poor. To be free from temptation of others' property is to reflect the honesty of our own souls. There are but few really honest people, in that between the thought and the deed we make ourselves dishonest. The fellow who steals acts dishonestly. We can steal in thought as well as in deed. Therefore, to be honest is a virtue that but few indulge. To be honest is to be satisfied, having all, wanting nothing. If you find yourself in such a state, then you are honest. If not, the temptation of your soul is bound to make you dishonest. This applies to the king and the peasant alike. All peoples are struggling to blast a way through the industrial monopoly of races and nations. But the Negro, as a whole, has failed to grasp its true significance and seems to delight in filling only that place created for him by the white man. The Negro who lives on the patronage of philanthropists is the most dangerous member of our society, because he is willing to turn back the clock of progress when his benefactors ask him so to do. No race in the world is so just as to give others, for the asking, a square deal in things economic, political, and social. Men who are in earnest are not afraid of consequences. No one knows when the hour of Africa's redemption cometh. It is in the wind. It is coming. One day, like a storm, it will be here. When that day comes, all Africa will stand together. Any sane man, race, or nation that desires freedom must first of all think in terms of blood. Why, even the Heavenly Father tells us that without the shedding of blood there can be no remission of sins. Then how in the name of God, with history before us, do we expect to redeem Africa without preparing ourselves, some of us, to die? I pray God that we shall never use our physical prowess to oppress the human race, but we will use our strength, physically, morally, and otherwise, to preserve humanity and civilization. For over 300 years, the white man has been our oppressor, and he naturally is not going to liberate us to the higher freedom, the truer liberty, and the truer democracy. We have to liberate ourselves. Every man has a right to his own opinion. Every race has a right to its own action. Therefore, let no man persuade you against your will. Let no other race influence you against your own. The greatest weapon used against the Negro is disorganization. If you have no confidence in yourself, you are twice defeated in the race of life. With confidence, you have won even before you have started. At no time within the last 500 years can one point to a single instance of the Negro as a race of haters. The Negro has loved even under severest punishment. In slavery, the Negro loved his master. He safeguarded his home even when he further planned to enslave him. We are not a race of haters, but lovers of humanity's cause. Mob violence and injustice have never helped a race or a nation, and because of this knowledge, as gathered from the events of ages, we as a people in this new age desire to love all mankind, not in the social sense, but in keeping with the divine injunction, man, love thy brother. Preparedness is the watchword of this age. For us as a race to remain, as we have been in the past, divided among ourselves, parochializing, insularizing, and nationalizing our activities as subjects and citizens of the many alien races and governments under which we live, is to but hold ourselves in readiness for that great catastrophe that is bound to come, that of racial extermination at the hands of the stronger race, the race that will be fit to survive. Humanity takes revenging crime from one age to the next, according to the growth and development of the race so afflicted. But the perpetuation of crime through revenge and retaliation will not save the human race. Europe is bankrupt today, and every nation within her bounds is endeavoring to find new openings, new fields for exploitation. That exploitation that will bring to them the resources, the revenue, and the power necessary for their rehabilitation and well-being. We are living in a strenuous, active age, when men see, not through the spectacles of sympathy, but demand that each and every one measures up in proportion to the world's demand for service. The attitude of the white race is to subjugate, to exploit, and if necessary, exterminate the weaker peoples with whom they come in contact. They subjugate first if the weaker peoples will stand for it, then exploit, and if they will not stand for subjugation nor exploitation, the other recourse is extermination. If the Negro is not careful, he will drink in all the poison of modern civilization and die from the effects of it. There can be no peace among men and nations, so long as the strong continues to oppress the weak, so long as injustice is done to other peoples. Just so long we will have cause for war and make a lasting peace an impossibility. Hungry men have no respect for law, authority, or human life. I am not opposed to the white race as charged by my enemies. I have no time to hate anyone. All my time is devoted to the upbuilding and development of the Negro race. When nations outgrow their national limits, they make war and conquer other people's territory, so as to have an outlet for their surplus populations. The world does not count races and nations that have nothing. Point me to a weak nation, and I will show you a people oppressed, abused, taken advantage of by others. Show me a weak race, and I will show you a people reduced to serfdom, peonage, and slavery. Show me a well-organized nation, and I will show you a people and a nation respected by the world. The battles of the future, whether they be physical or mental, will be fought on scientific lines, and the race that is able to produce the highest scientific development is the race that will ultimately rule. Let us prepare today, for the tomorrows and the lives of the nations will be so eventful that Negroes everywhere will be called upon to play their part in the survival of the fittest human group. Let us, in shaping our own destiny, set before us the qualities of human justice, love, charity, mercy, and equity. Upon such foundation, let us build a race, and I feel that the God who is divine, the almighty creator of the world, shall forever bless this race of ours. And who to tell that we shall not teach men the way of life, liberty, and true human happiness? Day by day, we hear the cry of Africa for the Africans. This cry has become a positive, determined one. It is a cry that is raised simultaneously the world over because of the universal oppression that affects the Negro. All of us may not live to see the higher accomplishment of an African empire, so strong and powerful as to compel the respect of mankind. But we, in our lifetime, can so work and act as to make the dream a possibility within another generation. Chapter 2. Propaganda. We're living in a civilization that is highly developed. We're living in a world that is scientifically arranged, in which everything done by those who control is done through system. Proper arrangement, proper organization, and among some of the organized methods used to control the world is the thing known and called propaganda. Propaganda has more to defeat the good intentions of races and nations than even open warfare. Propaganda is a method or medium used by organized peoples to convert others against their will. We of the Negro race are suffering more than any other race in the world from propaganda. Propaganda to destroy our hopes, our ambitions, and our confidence in self. Slavery. Slavery is a condition imposed upon individuals or races not sufficiently able to protect or defend themselves. And so long as a race or people expose themselves to the danger of being weak, no one can tell when they'll be reduced to slavery. When a man is a slave, he has no liberty of action, no freedom of will. He's bound and controlled by the will and act of others. As of the individual, so of the race. Slavery is not a condition confined to any one age or race of people. Slavery has been since man, in the different distribution of himself, scattered here, there, and everywhere, has grown and developed, wherein one race will become strong, and the other race remains weak. The strong race has always reduced the weak to slavery. It has been so in ages past. It is so now in certain parts of the world, and will be so until the end of time. The great British nation was once a race of slaves. In their own country, they were not respected because the Romans went there, brutalized and captured them, took them over to Rome and kept them in slavery. They were not respected in Rome because they were regarded as a slave race. But the Briton did not always remain a slave. As a freed man, he went back to his country, Britain, and built up a civilization of his own. And by his self-reliance and initiative, he forced the respect of mankind and maintains it until today. Force. The powers opposed to Negro progress will not be influenced in the slightest by mere verbal protests on our part. They realize only too well that protests of this kind contain nothing but the breath expended in making them. They also realize that their success in enslaving and dominating the darker portion of humanity was due solely to the element of force employed. In the majority of cases, this was accomplished by force of arms. Pressure, of course, may assert itself in other forms, but in the last analysis, whatever influence is brought to bear against the powers opposed to Negro progress must contain the element of force in order to accomplish its purpose, since it's apparent that this is the only element they recognize. Education. To be learned in all that is worthwhile knowing, not to be crammed with the subject matter of the book or the philosophy of the classroom, but to store away in your head such facts as you need for the daily application of life, so that you may the better in all things understand your fellowmen and interpret your relationship to your Creator. You can be educated in soul, vision, and feeling, as well as in mind. To see your enemy and know him is a part of the complete education of man. To spiritually regulate oneself is another form of the higher education that fits man for a nobler place in life. And still, to approach your brother by the feeling of your own humanity is an education that softens the ills of the world and makes us kind indeed. Many a man was educated outside the schoolroom. It's something you let out, not completely take in. You're a part of it, for it's natural. It's dormant simply because you will not develop it. But God creates every man with it, knowingly or unknowingly to him who possesses it. That's the difference. Develop yours, and you become as great and full of knowledge as the other fellow, without even entering the classroom. Miscegenation. Some of the men of the Negro race aggravate the race question because they force the white man to conclude that to educate a black man, to give him opportunities, is but to fit him to be a competitor for the hand of his woman. Hence the eternal race question. But not all black men are willing to commit race suicide and to abhor their race for the companionship of another. There are hundreds of millions of us black men who are proud of our skins, and to us, the African empire will not be a utopia, neither will it be dangerous nor fail to serve our best interests. Because we realize that, like the leopard, we cannot change our skins. The men of the highest morals, highest character, and noblest pride are to be found among the masses of the Negro race, who love their women with as much devotion as white men love theirs. Prejudice. The prejudice of the white race against the black race is not so much because of color as of condition. Because as a race, to them, we have accomplished nothing. We have built no nation, no government, because we are dependent for our economic and political existence. You can never curb the prejudice of the one race or nation against the other by law. It must be regulated by one's own feelings, one's own will. And if one's feeling and will rebel against you, no law in the world can curb it. Prejudice can be actuated by different reasons. Sometimes the reason is economic, and sometimes political. You can only obstruct it by progress and force. Radicalism. Radical is a label that is always applied to people who are endeavoring to get freedom. Jesus Christ was the greatest radical the world ever saw. He came and saw a world of sin, and his program was to inspire it with spiritual feeling. He was therefore a radical. George Washington was dubbed a radical when he took up his sword to fight his way to liberty in America 140 years ago. All men who call themselves reformers are perforce radicals. They cannot be anything else, because they're revolting against the conditions that exist. Conditions, as they exist, reveal a conservative state, and if you desire to change these conditions, you must be a radical. I am, therefore, satisfied to be the same kind of radical, if, through radicalism, I can free Africa. Government. Government is not infallible. Government is only an executive control, a centralized authority for the purpose of expressing the will of the people. Before you have a government, you must have the people. Without the people, there can be no government. The government must be, therefore, an expression of the will of the people. Evolution and the result. Evolution brings us changes that sometimes make us frail to recognize ourselves even after a lapse of centuries. When the great white race of today had no civilization of its own, when white men lived in caves and were counted as savages, this race of ours boasted a wonderful civilization on the banks of the Nile. It may sound good for some Negroes to say that they were born here or there, and they don't intend to go anywhere else but where they saw the light of day. But let me say to you men, the world is small, and humanity in the many and various race groups is growing larger every day. A race that was 10 millions 50 years ago is today 60 millions. A race that was 30 millions 50 years ago is today 90 millions. How many will they be tomorrow? And the world is not growing larger. What will happen through the multiplication of all these various race groups? Of those who are in power, of those who are strong, those who have at their command the forces of nature, through which they can exploit the weak and ultimately exterminate them. What will happen to you, the weak and unprepared, when the strong becomes more numerous even though the world remains at its present size? Ah, if you will but think down the future and compare the possibilities of that future with the happenings of the past, you will come to the conclusion that there is no other salvation for the Negro, but through a free and independent Africa. Whilst geographically speaking, the world has ever been in its natural divisions as we know it and see it, yet politically speaking, the world has changed and is still changing. Yesterday we had the Roman Empire, we had the Grecian Empire, we had even before the Carthaginian, the Assyrian, and the Babylonian empires. What has become of them? They've gone into the oblivion of the past because of human progress, because of the development of certain races as against the stagnation of others. But even yesterday, we also had the great German Empire. We had the Russian Empire. We had the Empire of Austria and Hungary. Where are they now? They too are traveling toward the oblivion of the past. Today, we have the great French Empire, the British Empire, and other great commonwealths. Will they stand? Ah, I think not, because evolution and human progress bring changes. And in the changes, no man can tell what will happen tomorrow as against what exists today. Therefore, I say to the 400 million Negroes of the world, prepare yourselves for the higher life, the life of liberty, industrially, educationally, socially, and politically. Poverty. A hellish state to be in. It has no virtue. It is a crime. To be poor is to be hungry without possible hope of food. To be sick without hope of medicine. To be tired and sleepy without a place to lay one's head. To be naked without the hope of clothing. To be despised and comfortless. To be poor is to be a fit subject for crime and hell. The hungry man steals bread, and thereby breaks the 8th commandment. By his state he breaks all the laws of God, and a man becomes an outcast. In thought and deed, he covets his neighbor's goods. Comfortless as he is, he seeks his neighbor's wife. To him there is no other course but sin and death. That is the way of poverty. No one wants to be poor. Power. Power is the only argument that satisfies man. Except the individual, the race, or the nation has power that is exclusive. It means that that individual, race, or nation will be bound by the will of the other who possesses this great qualification. It is the physical and pugilistic power of hairy wills that makes white men afraid to fight him. It was the industrial and scientific power of the Teutonic race that kept it for years as dictator of the economic and scientific policies of Europe. It is the naval and political power of Great Britain that keeps her mistress of the seas. It is the commercial and financial power of the United States of America that makes her the greatest banker in the world. Hence, it is advisable for the Negro to get power of every kind. Power in education, science, industry, politics, and higher government. That kind of power will stand out signally, so that other races and nations can see it. And if they will not see, then feel. Man is not satisfied or moved by prayers or petitions, but every man is moved by that power of authority which forces him to do even against his will. Universal suspicion. Humanity everywhere is struggling toward political freedom and economic opportunity. In this struggle, we're confronted with the rivalry of the keenest minds of the age, each race and nation seeking to present its best to the world. So much is expected of each by the different rivals that it becomes impossible to reach an amicable settlement and to establish universal confidence. It can be plainly seen that no one race or nation trusts the other. There is a universal suspicion that hovers over the conduct of every great leader representative of his race or nation. It is this suspicion that limited the Washington Four-Pact Treaty. It is this suspicion that caused the failure of the Genoa Conference. It is this suspicion that is going to wreck ultimately many of the nations and empires of today, thereby throwing into obscurity many of the races that now dominate the affairs of men. We as a race are called upon to play our part, and we must do it well. In the spread of this universal suspicion that causes nation to distrust nation, and race to distrust race, we also have our distrust which makes it impossible for us to believe in anyone else but ourselves. Dissertation on man. Man is the individual who is able to shape his own character, master his own will, direct his own life, and shape his own ends. When God breathed into the nostrils of man the breath of life, he made him a living soul and bestowed upon him the authority of Lord of creation. He never intended that that individual should descend to the level of a peon, a serf, or a slave, but that he should be always man in the fullest possession of his senses and with the truest knowledge of himself. But how changed has man become since creation? We find him today divided into different classes: the helpless imbecile, the dependent slave, the servant, and the master. These different classes God never created. He created man, but this individual has so retrograded as to make it impossible to find him, a real man. As far as the Negro race is concerned, we can find but few real men to measure up to the higher purpose of the creation. And because of this lack of manhood in the race, we've stagnated for centuries and now find ourselves at the foot of the great human ladder. After the creation, and after man was given possession of the world, the Creator relinquished all authority to his Lord, except that which was spiritual. All that authority which meant the regulation of human affairs, human society, and human happiness was given to man by the Creator, and man, therefore, becomes master of his own destiny and architect of his own fate. In process of time, we find that only a certain type of man has been able to make good in God's creation. We find them building nations, governments, and empires, as also great monuments of commerce, industry, and education. These men, realizing the power given them, exerted every bit of it to their own good and to their posterities. While, on the other hand, 400 million Negroes, who claim the common fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, have fallen back so completely as to make us today the serfs and slaves of those who fully know themselves, and have taken control of the world, which was given to all in common by the Creator. I desire to impress upon the 400 million members of my race that our failings in the past, present, and of the future will be through our failures to know ourselves and to realize the true functions of man on this mundane sphere. Race assimilation. Some Negro leaders have advanced the belief that in another few years, the white people will make up their minds to assimilate their black populations, thereby sinking all racial prejudice and the welcoming of the black race into the social companionship of the white. Such leaders further believe that by the amalgamation of black and white, a new type will spring up, and that type will become the American and West Indian of the future. This belief is preposterous. I believe that white men should be white, yellow men should be yellow, and black men should be black in the great panorama of races, until each and every race, by its own initiative, lifts itself up to the common standard of humanity, as to compel the respect and appreciation of all, and so make it possible for each one to stretch out the hand of welcome, without being able to be prejudiced against the other because of any inferior and unfortunate condition. The white man of America will not, to any organized extent, assimilate the Negro, because in doing so, he feels that he will be committing racial suicide. This he is not prepared to do. It is true he illegitimately carries on a system of assimilation, but such assimilation, as practiced, is one that he is not prepared to support because he becomes prejudiced against his own offspring, if that offspring is the product of black and white. Hence, to the white man, the question of racial differences is eternal. So long as Negroes occupy an inferior position among the races and nations of the world, just so long will others be prejudiced against him, because it will be profitable for them to keep up their system of superiority. But when the Negro, by his own initiative, lifts himself from this low state to the highest human standard, he will be in a position to stop begging and praying, and demand a place that no individual, race, or nation will be able to deny him. Christianity. A form of religion practiced by the millions, but as misunderstood and unreal to the majority as gravitation is to the untutored savage. We profess to live in the atmosphere of Christianity, yet our acts are as barbarous as if we never knew Christ. He taught us to love, yet we hate, to forgive, yet we revenge, to be merciful, yet we condemn and punish, and still we are Christians. If hell is what we are taught it is, then there will be more Christians there than days in all creation. To be a true Christian, one must be like Christ and practice Christianity, not as the bishop does, but as he says. For if our lives were to be patterned after the other fellows, all of us, bishop, priest, and layman, would ultimately meet around the furnace of hell, and none of us, because of our sins, would see salvation. The function of man. God placed man on earth as the Lord of creation. The elements, all nature, are at his command. It is for him to harness them, subdue them, and use them. Edison harnessed electricity. Today, the world reflects the brilliancy of his grand illumination. Stephenson, through experiments, has given us the use of the steam engine, and today the railroad train flies across the country at a speed of 60 miles an hour. Marconi conquered the currents of the air, and today we have wireless telegraphy that flashes news across the continents with a rapidity never yet known to man. All this reveals to us that man is the supreme Lord of creation, that in man lies the power of mastery, a mastery of self, a mastery of all things created, bowing only to the Almighty Architect in those things that are spiritual, in those things that are divine. Traitors. In the fight to reach the top, the oppressed have always been encumbered by the traitors of their own race, made up of those of little faith, and those who are generally susceptible to bribery for the selling out of the rights of their own people. As Negroes, we are not entirely free of such an encumbrance. To be outspoken, I believe we are more encumbered in this way than any other race in the world, because of the lack of training and preparation for fitting us for our place in the world among nations and races. The traitor of other races is generally confined to the mediocre or irresponsible individual. But, unfortunately, the traitors among the Negro race are generally to be found among the men highest placed in education and society, the fellows who call themselves leaders. For us to examine ourselves thoroughly as a people, we'll find that we have more traitors than leaders, because nearly everyone who essays to lead the race at this time does so by first establishing himself as the pet of some philanthropist of another race, to whom he will go and debase his race in the worst form, humiliate his own manhood, and thereby win the sympathy of the great benefactor, who will dictate to him what he should do in the leadership of the Negro race. It is generally, you must go out and teach your people to be meek and humble. Tell them to be good servants, loyal and obedient to their masters. If you will teach them such a doctrine, you can always depend on me to give you $1,000 a year, or $5,000 a year for the support of yourself, the newspaper, or the institution you represent. I will always recommend you to my friends as a good fellow who is all right. With this advice and prospect of patronage, the average Negro leader goes out to lead the unfortunate mass. These leaders tell us how good Mr. So-and-so is and how many good friends we have in the opposite race, and that if we leave everything to them, all will work out well. This is the kind of leadership we've been having for the last 50 years. It's nothing else but treachery and treason of the worst kind. The man who will compromise the attitude of his country is a traitor. And even so, the man who will compromise the rights of his race can be classified in no other way than that of a traitor also. Not until we settle down as 400 million people and let the men who have placed themselves in the lead of us realize that we are disgusted and dissatisfied, and that we shall have a leadership of our own and stick by it when we get it. We'll be able to lift ourselves from this mire of degradation to the heights of prosperity, human liberty, and human appreciation. Chapter 3. Present-day civilization. We are circumvented today by environments more dangerous than those which circumvented other peoples in any other age. We're face to face with environments in a civilization that's highly developed, a civilization that's competing with itself for its own destruction. A civilization like that cannot last because it has no spiritual foundation. A civilization that's vicious, crafty, dishonest, immoral, irreligious, and corrupt. We see a small percentage of the world's populace feeling happy and contented with this civilization that man has evolved, and we see the masses of the human race, on the other hand, dissatisfied and discontented with the civilization of today, the arrangement of human society. Those masses are determined to destroy the systems that hold up a society and prop such a civilization. As by indication, the fall will come. A fall that will cause the universal wreck of the civilization that we now see. And in this civilization, the Negro is called upon to play his part. He is called upon to evolve a national ideal based upon freedom, human liberty, and true democracy. Divine apportionment of earth. God Almighty created all men equal, whether they be white, yellow, or black. And for any race to admit that it cannot do what others have done is to hurl an insult at the Almighty who created all races equal in the beginning. The white man has no right of way to this green earth, neither the yellow man. All of us were created lords of the creation, and whether we be white, yellow, brown, or black, nature intended a place for each and every one. If Europe is for the white man, if Asia is for the brown and yellow man, then surely Africa is for the black man. The great white man has fought for the preservation of Europe. The great yellow and brown races are fighting for the preservation of Asia. And 400 million Negroes shall shed, if needs be, the last drop of their blood for the redemption of Africa and the emancipation of the race everywhere. Universal unrest in 1922. The human race is universally disturbed because of the many injustices inflicted upon the masses by the dominant powers. The privileged classes have for centuries dominated the will of the masses, and, as it would appear, have ground out of the toiling millions the last drop of sweat. These millions are now in rebellion. They're striking everywhere, in England, France, Germany, America, and other parts of the world. Those who are not on strike are shaking their fists in bloody revolution as a protest against the industrial and political systems of the day. In this big noise for world readjustment in the affairs of the human race, 400 million Negroes cry out for better consideration and for justice. World disarmament. Present-day statesmen are making the biggest blunder of the age if they believe that there can be any peace without equity and justice to all mankind. Any attempt at disarmament when half the world oppresses the other half is but a farce, because the oppressed will make their oppressors get armed sooner or later. Cause of wars. The world is not yet perfect. It's in chaos, yes, in confusion, and out of this confusion will come many more upheavals that will shake its very foundation. Fool not yourselves that the conferences that have been held, and will be held in the future, are sufficient to settle the disgruntled state of the world and the dissatisfied condition of humanity. They've not gone down to the root of all evils that give cause to the great discontent. They'll never be able to establish a permanent peace and present to us a settled world. The history of the past teaches us that we have had many wars, each more deadly, each more catastrophic. And even as the War of 1914 through 1918 was the most deadly we have experienced for ages, so in the very near future, we shall see the most bloody conflict ever waged by man. Whether it is to be a war of the races or of the nations, no one can tell. But so long as this injustice continues, so long as the strong continues to oppress the weak, so long as the powerful nations arrange among themselves to oppress the weaker ones and keep the more unfortunate of humanity in serfdom and to rob and exploit them, so long will the cause of war be fed with the fuel of revenge, of hatred, and of discontent. World readjustment. The political readjustment of the world means this, that every race must find a home. Hence the great cry of Palestine for the Jews, Ireland for the Irish, India for the Indians, and simultaneously, Negroes are raising the cry of Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. It is a cry for political readjustment along natural lines, and this readjustment has come out of the War of 1914 through 1918. Because we, as Negroes, realize that if, with our knowledge and experience of Western civilization, we allow the world to adjust itself politically, without taking thought for ourselves, we would be lost to the world in another few decades. The fall of governments. The fall of nations and empires has always come about first by the disorganized spirit. The disorganized sentiment of those who make up the nation or the empire. The one class opposing, fighting against the other class seeking to deprive them of the essentials of life, which are necessary for the good and well-being of all. The class that ruled in the past, and the class that rules now in government, are the people who have always provoked the spirit of those who are ruled. Hence you have social revolutions, civil strife, which ultimately result in the downfall of the empire or the nation. What has happened in the past will happen again. I am not attempting to prophesy the destruction of any of the now exiting empires or nations, but the empires and nations themselves are going to their own ruin. In Europe, we hear of great industrial unrests, laborers uniting themselves and marching to the representatives of governments, asking for better conditions to alleviate their suffering, instead of the representatives seeking to pacify and satisfy those who are in need. The representatives of such governments adopt a strong-armed policy to prosecute and persecute those who suffer and appeal for aid from the nation or the empire. What happens? The dissatisfied who are driven away by the majesty of the law go back to those who suffer with them and scatter throughout the nation or the empire the spirit of dissatisfaction that ultimately breaks out in civil strife, social disorder, which in turn brings the downfall of the nation or the empire. People who rule, being selected by the masses of their own, forget when they come into power that they have an obligation to those who place them in authority, and through selfishness, arrogate to themselves all that is good within the nation, to the exclusion of those who suffer, and to the exclusion of those who place them in their positions of trust. Hence, monopoly, industrial, commercial, and economic, which places power in the hands of the select few, and through the selfishness of administration, by the few, they cause the majority of the masses to exist always in want. Through this want, a spirit of dissatisfaction springs up among the people, and they, in their passion, seeking to correct the evil, tear down governments. Great ideals, no nationality. My enemies in America have done much to hold me up to public contempt and ridicule, but have failed. They believe that the only resort is to stir up national prejudice against me, and that I was not born within the borders of the United States of America. I am not in the least concerned about such propaganda, because I have traveled the length and breadth of America and have discovered that among the 15 million of my race, only those who have exploited and lived off the ignorance of the masses are concerned with where I was born. The masses of the people are looking for leadership. They desire sincere, honest guidance in racial affairs. As proof of this, I may mention that the largest number of members in the Universal Negro Improvement Association, of which I am President General, are to be found in America and are native-born Americans. I know these people so well and I love them so well that I would not for 1 minute think that they would fall for such an insidious propaganda. All intelligent people know that one's nationality has nothing to do with great ideals and great principles. If because I am a Jamaican, the Negro should not accept the principle of race rights and liberty, or the ideal of a free and independent race, then you may well say that because Jesus was a Nazarene, the outside world should not accept his doctrine of Christianity because he was an alien. Because Martin Luther was born in Germany, the world should not accept the doctrine of Protestantism. Because Alexander Hamilton and Lafayette were not born in America, Americans should not accept and appreciate the benefits they bestowed upon the nation. Because Marconi was an Italian, we of the New World should not make use of wireless telegraphy. Again, I say, great principles, great ideals, no nationality. I know no national boundary where the Negro is concerned. The whole world is my province until Africa is free. Purpose of creation. The man or woman who has no confidence in self is an unfortunate being and is really a misfit in creation. God Almighty created each and every one of us for a place in the world. And for the least of us to think that we were created only to be what we are, and not what we can make ourselves, is to impute an improper motive to the Creator for creating us. God Almighty created us all to be free. That the Negro race became a race of slaves was not the fault of God Almighty, the Divine Master. It was the fault of the race. Sloth, neglect, indifference caused us to be slaves. Confidence, conviction, action will cause us to be free men today. Purity of race. I believe in a pure black race, just as how all self-respecting whites believe in a pure white race, as far as that can be. I am conscious of the fact that slavery brought upon us the curse of many colors within the Negro race. But that is no reason why we of ourselves should perpetuate the evil. Hence, instead of encouraging a wholesale bastardy in the race, we feel that we should now set out to create a race type and standard of our own, which could not, in the future, be stigmatized by bastardy, but could be recognized and respected as the true race type anteceding even our own time. Man, know thyself. For man to know himself is for him to feel that for him there is no human master. For him nature is his servant, and whatsoever he wills in nature, that shall be his reward. If he wills to be a pygmy, a serf, or a slave, that shall he be. If he wills to be a real man, in possession of the things common to man, then he shall be his own sovereign. When man fails to grasp his authority, he sinks to the level of the lower animals, and whatsoever the real man bids him to do, even as if it were of the lower animals, that much shall he do. If he says go, he goes. If he says come, he comes. By this command, he performs the functions of life, even as by a similar command, the mule, the horse, the cow performs the will of their masters. For the last 400 years, the Negro has been in the position of being commanded, even as the lower animals are controlled. Our race has been without a will, without a purpose of its own, for all this length of time. Because of that, we've developed few men who are able to understand the strenuousness of the age in which we live. Where can we find in this race of ours real men? Men of character, men of purpose, men of confidence, men of faith, men who really know themselves. I have come across so many weaklings who profess to be leaders, and in the test, I have found them to be but the slaves of a nobler class. They perform the will of their masters without question. To me, a man has no master but God. Man in his authority is a sovereign lord. As for the individual man, so of the individual race. This feeling makes man so courageous, so bold, as to make it impossible for his brother to intrude upon his rights. So few of us can understand what it takes to make a man. The man who will never say die. The man who will never give up. The man who will never depend upon others to do for him what he ought to do for himself. The man who will not blame God. Who will not blame nature. Who will not blame fate for his condition. But the man who will go out and make conditions to suit himself. Oh, how disgusting life becomes when on every hand you hear people who bear your image, who bear your resemblance, telling you that they cannot make it, that fate is against them, that they cannot get a chance. If 400 million Negroes can only get to know themselves, to know that in them is a sovereign power, is an authority that is absolute, then in the next 24 hours, we would have a new race. We would have a nation, an empire, resurrected, not from the will of others to see us rise, but from our own determination to rise, irrespective of what the world thinks. A Solution for World Peace, 1922. We hear a great deal of talk about world peace today. Wilson of America, Lloyd George of England, Clemenceau of France, a few years ago, prophesied at Versailles a reign of peace. Up to the present, many of the leading statesmen of the world have pledged themselves to a program of world peace. Many conferences have been held, political as well as industrial, for the purpose of settling the question of peace. But up to now, none of them has laid the foundation for real peace, for a lasting peace. The peace of the world cannot be settled by political conferences, or by industrial conferences only. If we are to have a world peace, it will only come when a great interracial conference is called, when Jew will meet Gentile, when Anglo-Saxon will meet Teuton, when the great Caucasian family will meet the Mongolian, and when all will meet the Negro, and then and there straighten out the differences that have kept us apart for hundreds of years, and will continue to keep us apart until doomsday, if something is not done to create better racial understanding. If white men continue to exploit yellow men, if white men continue to exploit black and brown men, if yellow men continue to exploit brown and black men, then all we can look forward to is a reign of wars and rumors of wars. So long as Anglo-Saxon oppress Indians, so long as the French exploit the black race, so long as the Russian murders the Jew, so long will the cause for war be found, and so long will man continue to fight and kill his brother. If England wants peace, if France wants peace, I suggest to them to pack up their bag and baggage and clear out of Africa, because Africa in the future will be to them what Europe has been for the last 300 years, a hotbed of wars, political intrigues, and upheavals. And Europe has changed many a time politically. Once, the great Napoleon ruled, the Tsars ruled, and but recently the German eagle was the symbol of fear. Today, England stands out as the most brilliant star in the European political constellation. But what of tomorrow? Africa, with her threatened upheaval, will produce the same conditions in another century as Europe has done in the past. Can we not see that we are marching headlong into the abyss of eternal destruction? Can we not realize that we're not laying the foundation of peace? Can we not realize that we're but provoking the sleeping passions of the races? How long do you believe that 400 million Negroes will allow themselves to be exploited by alien races, robbed and murdered, just so long until the truth is brought home to them? And then, when the sleeping giant awakens, even like Samson, he may bring down the pillars of the temple. The war of 1914 through 1918 has created a new sentiment throughout the world. Once upon a time, weaker peoples were afraid of expressing themselves, of giving vent to their feelings. But today, no oppressed race or nation is afraid of speaking out in the cause of liberty. Egypt has spoken, Ireland has spoken, Poland has spoken, and Poland is free, Egypt is free, Ireland is also free. Africa is now speaking, and if for 750 years, Irishmen found perseverance enough to have carried the cause of freedom on and on until they won, then 400 million Negroes are prepared to carry on a fight for African liberty, even if it takes us to the seat of the Most High. Yes, if it takes us until Judgment Day, we shall fight the cause on and on, without relenting. The world may scoff at us, the world may deride us, but there have been many surprises for the world before, and there will be many more to come. Englishmen scoffed at the colonists when they agitated for independence in America. But their scoffs and derisions did not prevent George Washington from giving us the glorious stars and stripes. Men laughed at the propaganda of Tolstoy. The Tsar himself impugned the idea of a more liberal Russia. But today, Lenin and Trotsky rule. Yes, the Louis laughed at the propaganda of the liberals of France, but the French monarchy is no more. Today, Frenchmen take pride in the new democracy of France. So that others may laugh at us today because we're agitating the question of a free and independent Africa. But tomorrow, who knows? Africa will loom up as the greatest republic in the world. God as a warlord. God is a bold sovereign, a warrior lord. The God we worship and adore is a God of war, as well as a God of peace. He does not allow anything to interfere with his power and authority. The greatest battle ever fought was not between the Kaiser of Germany on the one hand and the Allied powers on the other. It was between Almighty God on the one hand and Lucifer the archangel on the other. When Lucifer challenged God's power in heaven and marshaled his forces on the plains of paradise, the God we worship and adore also marshaled his forces, his archangels, his cherubims and his seraphims, and in battle array, he placed himself before them with the royal standard of heaven. He faced the opposing General Lucifer with his hordes on the battle plains of heaven, and there the great war began. The whole universe shook as the battle raged between two opposing forces. And as God the Creator gained the upper hand of Lucifer, what did he do? Did he hoist the white flag of peace? No. God Almighty, God the Omnipotent, took hold of Lucifer and flung him from the heights of heaven to the depths of hell. thereby proving that he is a God of war as well as a God of peace. And when anyone transgresses his power, he goes to war in defense of his rights. Man is only a little lower than the angels. The angels are only a little lower than the Creator. But the Creator has bequeathed to angels and to men the same principles, the same policies that govern him as God. And even as he goes to war in defense of his rights, so man goes to war in defense of his rights. I believe with Napoleon. When someone asked him, "On what side is God?" he replied, "God is on the side of the strongest battalion." Napoleon was right. He had a true concept of God. God is really on the side of the strongest peoples because God made all men equal. He never gave superior power to any one class or group of people over another. And anyone who can get the advantage over another is pleasing God, because that he is the servant who has taken care of God's command and exercising authority over the world. The image of God. If the white man has the idea of a white God, let him worship his God as he desires. If the yellow man's God is of his race, let him worship his God as he sees fit. We, as Negroes, have found a new ideal. Whilst our God has no color, yet it is human to see everything through one's own spectacles. And since the white peoples have seen their God through white spectacles, we have only now started out, late though it be, to see our God through our own spectacles. The God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, let him exist for the race that believes in the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. We Negroes believe in the God of Ethiopia, the everlasting God, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, the one God of all ages. That is the God in whom we believe. But we shall worship him through the spectacles of Ethiopia.
Please consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.